All right. That is amazing, Maddie. Okay, we're good to go. And welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I've got Maddie, and I just wanted to take a moment to introduce you to Maddie before we dive into her half-hour masterclass. So Maddie runs a company called The Blogsmith. She is an SEO content strategist, and she works with clients like AAA, Automatic, Kinsta, and also Sprout Social. So get your cup of coffee, get your notepad, because for the next half hour, Maddie is going to be talking us through a masterclass on how to grow your business with virtual assistants. So Maddie, thank you so much, and over to you.
All right. Well, thank you for that introduction. And now let's do that thing where we figure out how to use technology.
My favorite.
All right, let me know if you can see my screen.
Yeah, that's fab.
All right, cool. So do that. All right, yeah, just let me know if it cuts out at any point.
Will do.
All right, cool. So like she was just saying, we're going to talk a little bit about how to grow your business with virtual assistants. And since I already had such a lovely intro, I won't go too much more into who I am. Other than to say that if you have any questions after going through this material, I'm happy to answer them. I'm at Maddy Osman on Twitter. And just so that you know, the reason why, I'm able to talk about this subject from experience is the fact that I currently work with virtual assistants in my business, and I have for many years now. And so what I'm going to share with you are some tips and pieces of advice that I've learned from experience, basically. So it probably helps to first start about why you should even bother working with a virtual assistant in the first place. You might have your own preconceived notions, but I will perhaps give you some other food for thought here. One of the people who's known for kind of introducing this concept into the idea of being like a solopreneur is Tim Ferriss, who wrote The 4-Hour Workweek. And to me, the 4-Hour Workweek was really sort of a guidebook as to how you might incorporate virtual assistants into your business for the purpose of what the quote says here, focus on being productive instead of being busy. There's this huge movement in, I guess, entrepreneurship in general. There's this idea that if you're always hustling, that's a good thing. The hustle leads to rewards. But what I've learned in my life after probably a year, maybe 2 years of this hustle lifestyle is that it really takes away from the whole point of going freelance or, being your own boss in the first place. So whatever you can do to find a better balance in your life and on top of that, to be more profitable is always going to be a good thing. So I, hereby reject the idea of the hustle. The hustle isn't good for you. You might have to hustle a little bit when you get started just because you're trying to build your business up from nothing, but you shouldn't have to do it all the time. And part of the reason why is because ultimately, as a solo business owner, what you're doing is you're selling access to your time. Obviously that works in tandem with whatever your specialty is. But at the end of the day, you as a person have 24 hours to split up however you want, and you have a limit. That's all you get. So in order to maximize this limited amount of time you have that's already claimed by things like sleep and eating and, hopefully spending time with your family and your friends and things like that, you have to maximize it. So that's one good reason to work with a VA is that they can increase your capacity for work in general, but also to take on the types of projects that you want to take up. And part of this, it really depends on what you're hiring a virtual assistant to do. And I'm going to introduce a couple ideas as to how you might use them shortly, but let's keep going through this in the meantime. One reason why I really like working with virtual assistants and various contractors is because it helps you kind of stay the course as long as you've done your work to sort of set up assignments for them and giving them direction on these things and you're getting ahead on that stuff, then, even if you're, say, on vacation or you have a sick day or you're just, you just need a mental health day or something, stuff will still get done, assuming you've done that work to give your virtual assistant stuff to do. And so even if you don't personally contribute anything, you know, on some given day, your business is still moving forward. And to me, that's one of the greatest benefits of working with virtual assistants and other contractors. On that note, by having this additional capacity on your team, you're also better able to balance things like rush orders or client emergencies. You know, this isn't something that happens a lot in my business. I'm pretty upfront with people in that, you know, my turnaround time is 7 business days. I can be flexible with that, but usually I'm kind of booked out to the point where it would be a burden on me to add those things on. And, you know, even if you're going to get extra money for accepting a rush order, it's not usually worth the burden that it becomes on your schedule and the things that you already plan to do in your off time. But having a virtual assistant who can kind of tee you up, you know, depending on what their job is, for those things, and, you know, helping you to accomplish them in a shorter time period without having to sacrifice your free time, basically, can be a great thing. So let's talk about a couple different ways that you can use virtual assistants to get the gears turning as to how you might incorporate them into your business. Virtual assistants can definitely save you money compared to the traditional hiring process. So the first thing to keep in mind when you're hiring somebody to work for your business is that, you know, depending on what country you work in, there is a distinction between an employee or a contractor. In the US, we call them 1099 contractors, because when you hire them, or when you onboard them to your business, you have to get a W-9, which basically just, you know, gets like their social security number, and it's just an official document so that the government can keep track of where tax money is being paid and all that good stuff. And then at the end of the year, you issue them a 1099 so that you're on the same page about how much, you know, you paid them and how much they're going to be reporting. So before you can decide if somebody's going to be a 1099 contractor, you have to ask yourself a couple questions. You know, for example, if somebody's working for you full-time, 40 hours a week, that might be more of like an employee type person, but that's not really the only thing you need to ask yourself to figure that out. One of the things that at least the US government says is in determining who's an employee versus a contractor is, you know, are you telling them what they have to do when? Are you directing how they are using their time? If you are, they're an employee. If it's on them to sort of set their own hours, and, you know, you can have deadlines obviously, but you can't say like, I need you to work on this at 9 a.m. That's more of like a subcontractor, you know, somebody who's like this 1099 contractor versus an employee. So again, it's something that you might want to consult with a lawyer or an accountant or both about these things. They're going to be a lot better able to steer you in the right direction. But in general, another thing to keep in mind is, you know, are you working with this person long-term or for a short-term project? And if it's short-term, then, and you're not, you know, going through all the paperwork of putting, you know, hiring an employee, then they're probably a contractor. So, and that's another important thing to bring up is things like paperwork. Employees, what makes them more expensive to hire onto your business is the fact that you have to pay like payroll taxes when you're paying them, whereas with a contractor, they're in charge of doing their own tax reporting and, you know, paying their own taxes. And also, once your business hits a certain amount of employees, you're also required to pay a certain level of benefits. And again, I'm not an expert on this stuff, especially because I haven't hired any part-time or full-time employees yet. I work exclusively with contractors, at least at this point in time. But all things to think about in determining where somebody, you know, lies in terms of this distinction, and then which then affects how you're going to pay them and also your ability to afford them. So I kind of see a subcontractor as sort of like a specialized worker who helps you tackle parts of projects, and a virtual assistant, though they can certainly have the same roles as a subcontractor, to me, it's somebody who helps with like research, admin, any other sort of tasks that you feel confident outsourcing within your business. So let's talk about a couple different places where you can find a virtual assistant. These are some places that have worked for me, and undoubtedly there are other options. But the first one is onlinejobs.ph. So this is a marketplace that exclusively caters to individuals who are from the Philippines. And some people say, you know, maybe there's an ethical issue with outsourcing work overseas where there is a lower cost of living. I don't think it's a problem for me personally. I don't see it as an ethical dilemma because I do outsource work to people domestically in my country, especially, you know, that specialized sort of work, the subcontractor, you know, distinction that I mentioned. And I work with VAs for some specialized work, but also more of that research, admin, behind the scenes sort of tasks. And what makes me sleep at night is that I pay them a higher than average wage, both because I want to be fair, I want to be respectful of their you know, unique skills and talents, and also I want to keep them interested in working for me. And so with the VAs that I work with, I regularly offer them the opportunity to ask for a raise if they think that they've done a good job. So we have a quarterly review process, and usually that results in a raise. Craigslist is another great source, I would say, especially domestically, for posting jobs, for posting gigs. It used to be free. I think now you have to pay $5 or something like that to put a posting in any given category. And the key to success with Craigslist is to just be really straightforward with what you're looking for, what the working conditions are, you know, treat it like a job description, give people sort of try to anticipate the questions that they would have about working with you and what that looks like. I also always include what rate I'm willing to pay because I want to make it clear, you know, from the start, like these are what the expectations are. I want to attract the type of people who are interested in that rate. You know, I try to make that rate high enough so that it's going to bring some quality prospects my way. And so, you know, again, that's another good one to post your job ads. There's a little less accountability with Craigslist because you're kind of fielding all that information by yourself. So you want to have a good process for reviewing resumes and samples and things like that. And we'll talk a little bit about that later. The last one is sort of like a gigs marketplace like Fiverr or Upwork, where you can hire people for one-off gigs. And usually that's how it works. But from my own personal experience, there have been several individuals where I really enjoyed working with them on whatever task it was that I hired them for. And so I keep hiring them again and again, usually through that gigs marketplace. But sometimes we strike up a connection outside of it too. So a final thing that I will suggest for where to hire a VA that I didn't put on this slide is like Facebook groups where freelancers hang out. It'll probably be the case where you're looking at people who are going to demand a higher rate, just in terms of my experience with hiring from all these different places, but can be a great way to find quality applicants. And if you've exhausted these other options, one more place to look. So let's look at a couple of tasks that you could delegate once you find a VA. In order to determine which tasks to delegate, I like this framework. I think it's from Toggle, one of those sort of like productivity apps. I was reading something that they wrote and they suggested something like this. So anyway, the first thing is a task that's time consuming. You know, there's different types of tasks where obviously you and your knowledge are going to be needed, but there are some things where you could probably get assistance at least for parts of that task to make it less time consuming. So for me, that's doing things like, you know, pulling statistics, getting quotes, like combing through case studies for articles I write, and, you know, presenting me with a summary of those findings. These are things that might take me hours to do, but you know, my VA can handle it, and then I can then take that information to write an article, for example. Low value tasks are tasks that, at least to me, it wouldn't really be beneficial for you to do them if you can be be making more money doing something else. So for example, I do social media content creation, social media marketing services for some of my clients, and the act of actually scheduling that content on Hootsuite or Buffer or whatever social scheduling tool you use, it's so annoying. You know, there's so many little things that could go wrong, like you know, making sure the image is right, making sure you're scheduling it at the right time, you know, double checking your work to make sure that you didn't actually schedule the Tuesday post for Thursday. So that's something that I can pay somebody else to do, you know, a slightly lower wage, but still make money on it. But spend my time earning money doing something that is more high value. So then the last one is sort of like specialty or occasional services. So occasional might be something like tax prep. I am awful at you know, looking through the books and, you know, making sure everything's reconciled and whatever. It's just not my thing. I could probably do it if I wanted to, but it honestly doesn't bring me joy. So I have outsourced that pretty much as quickly as I can. I also now, the same person who does my taxes is also my bookkeeper. So it's just really nice to say, like, I don't have to worry about that at all. Specialty services might be something like hiring you know, some sort of like email marketing automation expert, where, you know, it's something that if you spent a lot of time on that task, you could figure out how to do it more than likely. But is it worth your time to have to figure it out, then execute, you know, then test and all this stuff too? The same can be said about, you know, maybe like hiring a Facebook ads expert, for example. It's just, you know, the further you get into your business, the more you realize that you don't have to be a jack of all trades, especially if you are bringing in a decent income. It's so much better to recognize your strengths and also your limitations, and then hiring people that are smarter than you in other areas. And that's part of the benefit of working with virtual assistants and contractors. It's just that they already have that knowledge. So instead of like torturing yourself and trying to learn everything, you know, outsource that task to somebody who knows it. So we kind of talked about this a little bit. One of the categories of things you might outsource is stuff that you hate doing. For me, that's bookkeeping. For you, it might be some other aspect of your business, like maybe project management. Once you start to build out a team, you might have a virtual assistant who just handles project management and making sure that things are moving along as they should be, for example. We talked about this too, taking on like research tasks. And for me, you know, that might relate to writing, but it could also relate to other aspects of work that you do for clients. So for example, if you are evaluating tools for a certain client project, you might just outsource that to your virtual assistant and say, hey, can you know how I work best, what tools we use and all this stuff. So can you create some pro-con sheets and maybe even make a recommendation regarding what tool we should use? So, you know, it doesn't always have to be part of a project. It might just be part of helping you to disseminate important information quickly. Another example might be like if you're going on a trip in the near future and you're so focused on work that you don't have time to sort of evaluate different things that you could do. You could have your virtual assistant put together a list, you know, based on some parameters that you give them. And also they can tell you if, you know, there's any pressing deadlines for booking that stuff out if it's a popular tourist attraction. So it doesn't just have to be about business either. You know, any sort of like administrative client-facing tasks. So one example that I don't necessarily use my virtual assistants for, but some people do, is appointment setting. You know, finding a mutually agreeable time between two parties, or even like inbox management. If you have somebody that you trust enough to be filtering your inbox for you, that's something that I don't think I'm ready to give up control of yet, but maybe in the future, something I would explore. Specialized tasks, we already discussed, like email marketing automation or Facebook ads. Again, just something that somebody does better than you and already has the knowledge in their head to do. This one is interesting. People don't often think about outsourcing sales, you know, booking more time with clients and whatever. Well, that's not exactly what I want to say. what I do want to say is you can sort of outsource sales, maybe not necessarily by working with a VA, although you could certainly train them, or work with, you know, some sort of like call center with your, you know, desired script and have appointment setters to, you know, help you to start closing leads. But what I would instead maybe suggest is looking for people to act as affiliate marketers for your brand. You know, this may or may not work depending on what your business structure is and the way that you go about selling things. But say, for example, you have like a digital product or, you know, a course, an ebook, something like that. It's not exactly related to this subject, but just another thing that you can think about how other people can help you. You just have to obviously have the right sort of incentive to get people to want to sell your stuff. You know, it has to be high enough to make them want to proactively be sharing you with their audiences. But just another thing to think about in this whole idea of outsourcing things to people so that it's not just you and your business. So, you know, working for yourself, sometimes you get a little bit in your head and, you know, it's all about how you're running the business. But when you start to add contractors or virtual assistants, you have to think about how to delegate, how to be a good leader. And that's a tough shift for a lot of people. I know it was for me, but here are some of the things that I've learned. First is kind of a process thing. Just how do you get to the point where you hire somebody? So for me, this starts with an interview. A lot of the virtual assistants, specifically from that online jobs.ph website, they do speak English, like clearly, fluently. And so I would highly suggest whenever possible, getting on a video chat or, you know, if it's a domestic person, maybe getting on a phone chat. Video is really kind of the gold standard for me because it's easier to interact with people. It's easier to kind of see how they react to the questions that you have for them. But having some sort of interview, no matter what the medium is important to dig in a little bit more. What's kind of interesting about working with virtual assistants, especially those from overseas, is you can get a little bit more personal with questions, whereas if you're hiring an employee, those same questions might get you in trouble. So, you know, you might want to ask about their life around work. You know, do they have kids? Like, how does that affect their work environment? Again, these would be inappropriate questions if you were hiring an employee, but kind of fair game if you're hiring a contractor from overseas. So, you know, whatever you honestly think that you need to know in order to hire someone and to, you know, feel confident that they'll have your back when you need them, make sure that you get that out there. And the other part of this is once you have interviewed a couple people and have found a couple people who seem to fit this idea of what you want, give them a paid test based on the type of work that they would normally be doing, or at least one aspect of it. The idea is not that they produce a perfect end result. It's more to see how they follow direction and how they take feedback. And it has to be paid. Absolutely. Don't ask people to do free work for you. Like, you're not special enough for somebody to want to work for you for free. I don't think, you know, even like Beyonce is special enough that people would want to work for her for free, although they probably do, but you shouldn't ask that of them, is what I'm trying to say. So, and you know, I think that by saying in the job description, whatever your ad is, that there will be a paid test, that also helps people to see that you're a fair person, that you're not just wasting their time. That's why I like to set, you know, a lot of expectations in that job description as far as what the rate's going to be, what the working conditions are going to be. You know, I tell people you can work at any time of the day as long as deadlines are met. Like, I don't need you to be on call. I just need you to be responsive, and I need you to be on time. So setting expectations, every person who posts a job should do this. It's so annoying to waste your time on something that is not going to be a fit, and it might be because of how much they're going to pay you, or because the working conditions, quite frankly, suck, or because they want you to do a free test. So don't be that person, please. Inevitably, whether you work with one person or a team of people, you need to have some sort of project management process to keep all this stuff straight so that both you and they know when things are due. So I have kind of like a couple different systems in place for different tasks, which is annoying. So I'm trying to bring them together with a tool called Notion, which I'm still kind of experimenting with. But right now, I have Basecamp for anything related to social media stuff, which makes it easy for me to communicate with different team members, and also for things to then get scheduled out with all the, the copy, the images, any sort of necessary assets in place. And then I use Todoist for other tasks because it's very lightweight, it's simple. It definitely doesn't have, as many features and things as a tool like Basecamp or Asana, but that's kind of why I like it. I like that it's just simple and straightforward. There's no question about when things are due, what the associated information is and who's it assigned to, for example. Another thing that you're going to want to do in the spirit of creating processes is having some sort of knowledge base. Where people on your team can refer to you for things like how to use your favorite social scheduling tool, how you want them to do a certain project. So one thing that I've found that makes it easier for me to delegate stuff is, even if I can't write it out in words, sometimes just filming myself going through doing it myself, and then having that video to share with my virtual assistant that shows them exactly what I'm seeing on the screen, and adding that sort of filler of how to do it. Sometimes it's easier to just do it as a video, what I found at least, than to just write it out as a process document. But either way, I store it all in one central place. Right now it's Google Sites. In the future, as I continue to evaluate Notion, it'll be Notion. And Google Sites is great because you can invite certain people to see your company intranet. You don't have to know code or anything. You just kind of put it together, just sort of clean pages. It's not super pretty, although I think they have new templates now. But the point is not for it to be pretty. It's just your intranet where people can go to get information about how to do certain tasks. And, if there's anything that people need to know about certain clients, you can also create pages for that as well. And the whole reason behind this is so that you don't have to repeat yourself. Once you create this stuff, even if that VA doesn't stick with you, the next time somebody gets hired onto your business, then you can just refer them to whatever pages on the intranet they need to familiarize themselves with. And I will say, I also share this class, the same content on Skillshare, where I also share a bunch of other content, and a lot of the content that I've created for Skillshare in this sort of, talk through class situation helps to train my VAs to do certain tasks. So, whatever you can do to repurpose things in your business, I highly recommend trying to do those things. In general, when you're assigning tasks to your virtual assistants, be as clear as you can in terms of giving guidance for how you want that final product to look like. If you can give examples of what that final product should look like, all the better. It's going to be a crapshoot at the beginning, especially when you're still developing these processes, but it's a teachable moment for how to better communicate with members of your team what you want. Also, make sure that your deadlines are clear. I ask my VAs, at least the ones that can sometimes miss deadlines, to confirm that they see something in whatever project management tool I'm communicating with them, so that they can't make the excuse that they didn't see it. So again, you'll kind of learn these things as you work with your contractors and your virtual assistants, but whatever you can do to just set processes forth from the beginning will help to set a good tone for your work with your virtual assistants. So one thing that I like to say to anyone who works with me is please ask any questions you have before getting started, ideally before the due date, so that if there's anything that we need to go back and forth about, we can handle that in a timely manner. So I definitely encourage questions. I think that you should too. I think that sometimes when, somebody's in a position that's higher than somebody else, sometimes that person in the lower position is trying to do the best they can. They don't want to bug that other person. Obviously I work with virtual assistants because I want to use my time in other ways, but at the same time, you know, if I can clarify something in a couple minutes that makes the final output better, then that's time that's so much better spent than after the fact, where I have to clean up whatever the error is that's ultimately my fault for not addressing up front, or, you know, anticipating that that might be a problem. Another thing is, when somebody turns something into you and you have to make corrections, don't just keep that stuff to yourself. Make sure that they're aware of things, especially things that you start to notice are a pattern, or, you know, something that might become a pattern. So just, you know, be liberal with feedback, be kind, you know, don't be mad about it or mean, but say, this is why I want it to be this specific way, and that'll help them in the future to do work more along the lines of what you were hoping to get. So I'll just go through a couple tools and resources, many I've already mentioned, that might be helpful to you as you decide to work with virtual assistants, or, you know, some sort of remote team. So depending on how active your virtual assistant is with sort of like the front facing side of your business. So the example I'll give is like social media stuff. You don't necessarily want to be directly sharing passwords and login information with them, especially if it's client passwords and login information. So having a password management tool like LastPass is great, because it encrypts the password. They can't even see what it even is. And then you can, you know, deny access if something happens in the future where you have to cut ties with that person, or if it's just, you know, naturally they're moving on. I like to use some sort of time tracking tool, because I like to keep people honest. I don't like people just estimating how much time a certain task pays, because I do pay, at least at this point in time, all of my contractors by the hour. And it also helps me to estimate, you know, how long certain tasks take. So I recommend Toggle. The version that my contractors use is free. There's other time trackers out there, so I don't really have a preference, but that's just the one I use. For invoicing, I like to keep track of all my payments, or all the payments that I will make to contractors in terms of getting an invoice from them. And so I ask everyone to invoice me through PayPal. But the thing is, I don't actually pay out via PayPal for any of them, because PayPal takes like a 2% cut of whatever their paycheck is. And I know this very well, because a lot of clients pay me through PayPal, and it always hurts a little bit when, you know, the amount drops immediately after I receive it from them, because PayPal is taking their cut. So what I do instead is it used to be QuickBooks, but now I use Gusto to pay out my contractors. And you can use Gusto to pay out contractors or employees. And Gusto just charges me to process that payment. It's probably like $6 per active contractor per month, which adds up depending on how big your team is. But that's a benefit that I like to give my contractors, because it shows that I care. You know, it shows that I understand that these online tools can be kind of annoying sometimes, when you think you're making a certain amount of money and then they automatically take a certain percentage out. For my international contractors, I use TransferWise, and it's the same thing. It's like a small fee on their end, that they pay maybe $5 per transfer or something like that, but it actually ends up being a lot cheaper between that PayPal, whatever rate that they take, and also like an international fee exchange sort of rate. So I'm always looking for new ways to help my contractors get like exactly what they're making from me. And I encourage you to do that too, because it just shows that you care. And the more things that you can do to demonstrate that you care to your contractors, the more likely they are to stick around with you. So we've also already talked about these last two. I use Todoist for most of my task management stuff, but again, I'm evaluating Notion, and then Google Sites for my intranet. So a couple just final resources to keep in mind. We already mentioned The 4-Hour Work Week by Tim Ferriss. I actually had to read this book twice, because the first time it really annoyed me and I thought that it was exploitative. So my recommendation would be to take it with a grain of salt when you read it. And then the other one is Virtual Freedom, which again is just like all about how to work with virtual assistants, how to incentivize them, you know, how to delegate tasks. And then I've written a couple articles. If you go on WPMU Dev, the website, and you just look for my name, Maddy Osman, there's actually a third one too that goes over a lot of the same stuff we covered here, but in more depth. You know, just some more guidance for working with virtual assistants. So with that, I'm done. And I'll unshare the screen if I can. Let's see.
That is great. Thank you, Maddy. Just while you get the screen back, I just wanted to say what a comprehensive overview. It's definitely clear that you speak from experience. I loved all the little hacks and tips that you put into play there, not just with the processes, but also with the people management, because you're working with people who are contractors. They're not necessarily employees. They're not a part of your team. So I really appreciated that. One brilliant takeaway, you had such practical takeaways, but I loved when you said, I know that sometimes it can be tough to delegate. Sometimes we don't want to do that. And a good way of doing that is the barrier can often be, I don't want to sit down and write this process, like nightmare. Right. So just filming yourself, popping it in central place. I love that you said that. That's a really good tip. I wanted to tease out from you a little bit more about, you talked about that feeling of how would you encourage other people to stretch their boundaries of what they're willing to delegate? And like you said, oh, you know, my inbox, I'm not ready to delegate that yet. How would you encourage people who are maybe feeling that about more, that they still wanted to hold on to stuff?
I would say, you know, obviously the easiest way to stretch the boundaries is to just try it. So give somebody a chance to do a task that's not client facing, that's somewhere in the background, and maybe don't go in with the expectation that it's going to go really well, but go in with the expectation that you're going to learn something either about how you delegate or, you know, how your workers are currently thinking about how to execute tasks. And then use that to refine your next ask. And so, you know, part of it is just learning how to delegate, but part of it, kind of like you said, is learning how to work with the specific people on your team. And everybody's different. So it can be hard to figure out what incentivizes people to do stuff on time. And it's a constant process, but the only way you're going to figure those things out is if you test it.
Great advice. So the last one I wanted to touch on was, sometimes you get the feedback that people don't like to tell other people what to do. They don't like to be so prescriptive that this is your task. You know, if they were employees, you would call it micromanagement. So what would you say about why is it clear to be kind, and actually it's the most effective way both for you and for the virtual assistants?
I mean, I think as somebody who works with virtual assistants, it's inevitably going to be, well, maybe not inevitably, but it tends to be maybe a closer relationship than a manager to an employee. Obviously, you're separated in terms of geographical boundaries, hence, you know, the term virtual. So don't worry so much about coming across as a micromanager. Take whatever opportunities you can to build that relationship with that person, and to, like, you know, test out how they're going to handle certain tasks. I'm trying to think of the best way to answer this.
It's a tricky one, isn't it? It's the fact that some people don't like that form of really clear direction, but for others, that's the best use of your time. You're giving me a list of, hey, like, this is what needs to be get through. You've given me the resources to get through them, and actually that's empowering for me. Whereas for some other people, that wouldn't be empowering, it would be demanding. And
yeah, I mean, I would say, like, from my own personal experience, when a client sends me a brief for an article they want me to write, and they just lay exactly out what they want, that really helps me to make sure that the final product that I create for them is something that they're really gonna like. You know, it's kind of like with art. When you have constraints, sometimes you get the best results because it takes away some of the guesswork. You're not just looking at a blank canvas, you kind of have it teed up for you. So, you know, obviously, depending on the type of people you work with, they might see it the same way, they might see it differently. And if they do see it way differently than you do, then maybe they're not a good fit. And so in that case, it might be like something that I do when I'm putting up job descriptions is I say, here's an example of, you know, a certain project that I would have you do. And then here's the end output that I would create from that. And so I think, again, by just being really upfront with what you want and what those working conditions are going to be, hopefully, you know, the people who are most interested in working with you will read through that completely. You might want to ask some clarifying questions in your interview to make sure that they did. Or like one thing that I do on the job description is I'll say, you know, use like this particular subject line when replying to me so that I know that you actually read all this stuff. So little things like that you can do to sort of stack the deck in your favor.
Right, and that's a great way of putting it. So you've already kind of bypassed those potential problems by hiring the person who's the right fit to begin with.
Right.
Oh, Maddy, thank you so much for your time today. That masterclass was brilliant, super practical. I know it's going to be really valuable. So thank you very much. That's Maddy from the Blogsmith, and we look forward to hearing from you soon. See you then.
All right, sounds good.
Thanks.
Woo.